Okay, it's recording.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining today's workshop. I'm sure a few more people might join in, but we'll get started today anyway. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're located on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we thank them for having cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. As funders for climate initiatives, it is especially important that city staff acknowledge the systemic inequities that have benefited and favored some groups while disproportionately impacting cultural communities, Indigenous, Black, and people of color over time. And we also recognize that climate change impacts groups differently. Therefore, we have the responsibility to address these systemic inequities in a way that expands access and creates new ways of advancing sustainability in Vancouver together. Through the Greenest City grants, we're looking to support projects that actively work to reduce systemic inequities experienced by residents throughout the city while meeting the needs of communities most impacted by climate change. My name is Sarah Laban, and I am a planning analyst in the sustainability group, and I'm supporting the Greenest City grant application process. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Marga Passis. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Marga Pasas. I'm a policy analyst, and I'm overseeing the Greenest City grant this year, but some of you might be familiar with Rachel Telling. I'm taking over for her while she is on maternity leave.
So the purpose of today's workshop is to best prepare you for your application and answer some of your questions. First, I'll provide an overview of Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan as well as Vancouver's Equity Framework. Then I'll go into greater detail about the application process, timeline, eligibility, and selection criteria. And then I'll pass it over to Marga to lead the question and answer period. We'll have plenty of time, hopefully at least 45 minutes for that. So just before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone on the call that this meeting is being recorded. So if you can please mute yourself and turn off your cameras to improve our bandwidth, we'd really appreciate it. There is a chat function. You can use that to introduce yourself. You can introduce yourself and your organization. That's great so that we can know who's on the call. You can also use the chat function to ask a question. And there's also a raise hand function if you would like to use that. And I'll also note that we'll distribute a copy of this presentation and we'll attach the FAQ or the questions that were asked today to the back of the presentation. That will be posted online by the end of next week. And we're also hoping to post the recording in some way. We haven't quite figured out where it will be posted, but you'll be notified of that. So let's begin. So the Greenest City grant funds projects that are place-based and contribute to Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan while advancing equity. So this year, the focus areas include active transportation, energy efficiency and green buildings, ecosystem restoration and carbon sequestration, food systems, and the fifth one is consumption and waste. Projects can be 1 to 2 years in length. We are funding up to $50,000 per project, and the application deadline is November 8th. So what is Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan? The Climate Emergency Action Plan, I may also refer to it as CEAP throughout this presentation. It is a 5-year action plan that addresses Vancouver's largest sources of carbon emissions, which are buildings and transportation. So this plan was approved in November 2020, and it's a plan that puts Vancouver on track to reduce our carbon pollution by 50% by 2030, which is in alignment with the findings of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. There are 6 big moves identified in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, and these 6 moves put us on a path to achieve our 2030 targets. So you'll see the 6 moves on the screen here. I'll just go through the targets really briefly. Big Move 1, which is called Complete Walkable Neighborhoods. The target is 90% of people living within an easy walk or roll of their daily needs.
We're going to listen to this on the way, if that's okay.
Big Move 2, sorry, I think I heard someone speaking. Margaret, would you mind muting? Big Move 2, the target is that 2/3 of trips in Vancouver can be made by active transportation and transit. Big Move 3, our target is that 50% of the kilometers driven on Vancouver roads are by zero emission vehicles. Big Moves 4 and 5, Big Moves 4 are to cut carbon pollution from buildings in half. Big Move 5 is to reduce our embodied carbon emissions by 40% in new buildings and construction projects. And then Big Move 6 is to capture carbon in forest, wetlands, and soils, and that work plan is still being developed. So you'll notice that 3 of the focus areas for the Greenest City grants apply to many of the big moves. We'll be prioritizing projects related to active transportation, energy efficiency and green buildings, ecosystem restoration, and carbon sequestration. These 6 big moves will accelerate our climate action and help to reduce our carbon pollution by 50% by 2030. But importantly, a big part of reducing our emissions involves engaging our communities and take meaningful climate action. So through these grants, we hope to foster sustainability leadership and collaboration and mobilize community in taking collective action and on climate in Vancouver. Another key aspect of the Climate Emergency Action Plan is its focus on equity. So we recognize that climate change impacts people differently, and often those who contributed the least to causing it will experience the worst impacts. Our focus on equity is further supported by Vancouver's equity framework, and this was recently approved by Vancouver City Council in mid-2021. And this equity framework lays the foundation for internal action planning and culture change within the City of Vancouver as an organization. And importantly, it defines equity as both a process and an outcome. So as a process, we need to seek ways to transform current structures, policies, and processes in order to better balance power and influence. And equity as an outcome, we need to expand access and address systemic inequities. So through these grants, we're looking to support projects that actively reduce systemic inequities experienced by residents in Vancouver while meeting the needs of communities who are most impacted by climate change. And specifically, when we're reviewing applications, we do evaluate if there's a potential of the project to reduce systemic inequities. I'll pause here to see if there were any questions that came up in the chat before moving on to more specific information about the grants.
No questions have come up in the chat, Sarah. I was just posting to welcome new folks coming in and just a note that this is being recorded. So I've put people on mute for now, but there'll be more question and answer opportunities after the presentation too.
Okay, sounds good. So then we'll move into the grant overview. So feel free to put any questions as they pop up into the chat, and then we'll address them after this. So just to reiterate again, the projects this year must be place-based and contribute to the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And below you can see the 5 focus areas that are listed. I've already touched on those. In addition to this criteria, projects should also work to reduce the systemic inequities experienced by residents. Projects should engage local residents and communities to increase the sense of ownership of climate solutions. The project should strengthen social connections among individuals and networks. And projects can also be led by equity-seeking organizations. So these grants, we've been funding these grants since about 2011, and I'll highlight some of the key metrics between 2016 and 2021. So the main mandate of the grants in that period was to fund community-driven initiatives that help advance sustainability in Vancouver generally. There have been 34 projects funded, and that's about an average of 5 to 6 per year, with an average of about $35,000 to $45,000 per project. And there are currently 14 projects that are being funded. So moving into 2022, the mandate is quite similar, though there's a bigger emphasis on the Climate Emergency Action Plan, as there was last year, as well as the importance of advancing equity in Vancouver. This year, there is just over $276,000 in our pot, and each project applied for can receive up to $50,000. The projects can be 1 to 2 years in length, and the application deadline this year is November 8th, 2021. I believe that's a Monday. So I'll just walk through the application process quickly. It's kind of a 3-step process. So for the step 1 is to determine your eligibility. I'll get to the eligibility criteria right away. Once you determine if you're eligible, you can download and complete the application documents. There are 4 application documents on our website, and we'll go into those a little bit deeper as well. And then finally, once your application is complete, you can email them to socialpolicygrants@vancouver.ca. And again, the deadline for that is November 8th. So as you know, because you're here, our applications opened on October 4th and they closed November 8th. Between November 9th and 26th, we'll be doing an internal review and evaluation of all the applications that come forward. And then in January of next year, we'll be putting together our funding recommendations to go to council. And those funding recommendations will be considered and approved by council in mid-February. And 1 week before the report goes to council, the successful applicants will be notified. So step 1 is to determine your eligibility. I'll go through this quickly. I think there are always lots of questions about who is and who is not eligible for these grants. So who is eligible? Registered nonprofit societies, registered charities, and First Nations. Organization must have an independent, active governing body composed of volunteers. You must demonstrate accommodation and inclusion. There should be a demonstrated capacity to deliver the proposed initiative, and the project must be delivered within the boundaries of City of Vancouver. Those who are ineligible, so individuals, cannot apply for this grant, nor can for-profit organizations, land acquisition, large-scale capital costs, exclusive university-led research. And I'll also note that we will only fund the same organization or project or initiative a maximum of 2 times in a 5-year period. So throughout the 4 application documents, these are sort of the 5 criteria that we're looking for and that we're evaluating your application on. So once you've determined that you're eligible, you can begin your application. I will go into greater depth into all 5 of these bullet points. And so we're looking to understand how your project, or the potential impact of your project. So does it contribute to climate action and resilience in Vancouver? What is its impact and scalability over time? Does your project contribute to reducing systemic inequities experienced by residents? What is the level of community engagement and community benefit and collaboration with other partners in this project? And is your project and budget realistic? So now the slide is pretty detailed, lots of information on it. I'm going to go through, this is our selection criteria, and I'm going to go through each criteria for you so that you can, we're hoping that by sort of sharing this criteria, it'll help you focus your application and just sort of know what exactly we're looking for. So the first selection criteria is contribution to climate action and resilience in Vancouver. So here you should identify which of the 5 focus areas your project will contribute to. And then we're really looking for how well does your proposal identify a need, How does it propose a solution? And does it clearly state the hypothesis in terms of like levers of change and the potential to measurably advance one or more of the climate emergency action plan goals? And what is its social impact? We're looking to understand maybe if this project fills an existing gap or a challenge that you've identified. And you can see that the scoring from 0 to 3 here is based on the alignment to city sustainability goals. So the second selection criteria is impact and scalability, which builds on the previous one. We're looking to understand, does the potential impact warrant the grant dollars that are requested? And is there potential for the project to be sustained or expanded after the Greenest City funding ends? Related to that, can it be scaled or can it be evolved over time? And just a quick tip, in your application, when you're identifying like scalability or impact, we look at both quantitative and qualitative measurements. So we value the like community engagement, climate action, education and awareness, social impact. It's not always just like exact, like for example, carbon reducing, like if it's reduced carbon emissions. The third selection criteria here is contribution to reducing systemic inequities in Vancouver. So this is closely aligned with the Climate Emergency Action Plan as well as Vancouver's Climate Equity Framework. So we want to understand if your project has the potential to reduce systemic inequities faced by Vancouver residents and how equity will be embedded in any community engagement or how your organization is addressing inequities generally. We also want to know, is the project or organization inclusive, and what is the benefit of this project to the community? So you'll see here in the scoring, if it scores 0, it does not contribute to reducing systemic inequities. If it scores 1, it means that inequities are identified, but there isn't necessarily an attempt at reducing them. 2 out of 3 is the funding for this project would significantly support work to reduce inequities. And then if it ranks 3 out of 3, the project is really centered on reducing systemic inequities. The fourth selection criteria is community engagement, benefit, and collaboration. So does this project involve those affected by the proposed work, and does it increase the skills and assets of Vancouver residents where possible? We're looking to understand, is there evidence of community support and collaboration in the project? And does the project involve those who are affected by the proposed work? And as part of the application, I'll quickly note that we do ask for an approximate breakdown of the groups of the project, like who it will engage with. You certainly don't have to stress out about this section. Estimates are perfectly fine. And moving on to the fifth selection criteria. So the fifth one is this project a realistic plan and resourcing? So we want to know, does the project offer a realistic plan for achieving its goals and objectives? How clear is the proposed methodology? Do the costs and time frame reflect reasonable parameters? And can the project realistically be accomplished within the proposed budget that you're putting forth? I'll just remind you all here that each project is eligible for up to $50,000. And I will say that if you're applying for more than 1 year of funding, make sure that you fill out the budget for each year of the grant. Okay, so step 3, once you've completed all these documents, is to submit your application. So as I've said several times today, it's due on November 8th, and all the documents can be emailed to Social Policy Grants. There's a checklist in the project information. It's on like the second last page of the project information form. And we're looking for these documents. So the first one is the organization information form. That one's online. A certificate of incorporation, project information form. We're looking for the operating budget for your organization, as well as the project budget. We have a couple of examples if you're looking, if you'd like to better understand like how it's laid out, and you can just email us for a request on that. We're also requiring your most recent audited financial statements. However, if you don't have audited financial statements, that's okay. We'll also accept a year-end statement that's endorsed by 2 members on your board of directors. We would also like to see a list of board of directors and an annual report if available. That one's optional. I covered a lot of information there, so we'll stop here and we'll switch it over to answer any questions. You can use the chat. You can also raise your hand and open up the floor to the applicants.
And I'm going to stop recording now as well.